A little while back, Owen Jones appeared on This Week with Andrew Neil, where he showed his usual class. He started off by repeatedly talking over his fellow guests, like this.
All mainstream politicians are against that. When Conservative members of Parliament were being murdered by the IRA, when the IRA attempted to kill the Prime Minister of this country, Jeremy Corbyn was sympathetic to the IRA.
Right, and do you know what?
The IRA was invited. The IRA was invited to the House of Commons by Jeremy Corbyn.
I'm not going to rerun the smears of the last general election campaign, which the public
these are not smears.
Soundly rejected. They did
smears.
not support the IRA's violent campaign. The leadership of Sinn Féin made that clear.
But he then promptly demanded that they let him finish.
Talking to Sinn Féin, who ended up as part of a peace process, governing with the DUP,
Oh, no one's going to
was the right
believe
thing
that.
to do. Now, in terms of no, I've got to take you up on the Conservative Party's pandemic racism, and you'll let me finish. Because you're right, anti-Semitism needs to be driven out the left. It's a disgusting disease.
Yes. Putting aside such annoying and entirely predictable hypocrisy, Owen was given free rein to put his own spin on an encounter he'd just had with a number of Brexit supporters. Now, I don't want to be entirely dismissive of what he went through. After all, he's been physically attacked in the past. But Jones could be seen smiling broadly while being heckled by a handful of people he insisted on labelling as fascists. And there we thought they were protesting in defence of democracy. But whatever. There was no real abuse going on, and Jones wasn't even jostled, never mind attacked. But he was adamant on how horrifying the experience was, and that it was a purely right-wing phenomenon. To me, the protest seemed relatively good-natured, but to Jones, it symbolised the rise of fascism, aided and abetted by the right-wing media who have normalised the language of the far right. Let's look at his take on events.
On Monday, you are a traitor! Here in the leafy environs of College Green, a sorry bunch of fascists.
Answer the question. Come on, we'll have a chat.
And please, can we stop calling them pro-Brexit protesters?
Liar, 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 liar.
Millions of decent Leave voters have nothing to do with these pound shop black shirts.
Why are you special that you shouldn't be confronted by the public, Anna?
Tried harassing me.
You're a tampon, angry, aren't they? A tampon. I'm a tampon.
Anna Soubry.
Soubry is a Nazi. Soubry is a Nazi.
The campaigner Femi Olawale.
You just called me David Lammy.
Oh, what's it? Cultural appropriation? Who are you mug? No one. Now listen.
And the journalist Kay Burley.
Two liars on Steiner.
And Dawn Foster.
Stick your flag with stars on your arse.
Much of the media's outrage this week has focused on abusiveness, nasty words, and the rights and wrongs of protest. Our focus should be on the rise of fascism, aided and abetted by the mainstream media.
Look at these lovely people. Keep going. Traitor!
Secondly, outrage came from the same right-wing press, which has normalised the language of the far right, enemies of the people, crush the saboteurs, traitor. Now, Anna Soubry was called a Nazi and a traitor. Guess which newspaper called her a traitor last year?
Oh yeah? Lovely lot. Come on, answer the question.
Yet ever since Monday, the media has tried to conflate this far-right harassment with all forms of protest and peaceful civil disobedience, attacking the left in the process. The far-right is a menace because its supporters abuse and assault minorities, have killed a Labour MP, have tried to kill another Labour MP, have conspired to murder Jeremy Corbyn and Sadiq Khan, and have been responsible for numerous foiled terror plots. The far right is a real and present murderous threat. The left is not.
Fake news. Why do I wait for... Why are you writing? Why do you write? Why are you misleading articles? Listen, you are a horrible little liar. Horrible little liar. So how many people attended the Brexit
Oh, it's brutal out here.
How many?
Look at them.
Look, you can't even answer.
As far as Owen is concerned, problems of this nature are an entirely one-way street. The far right are horrendous. But with the left, there's no real problem. Now, I'm not going to agree with that interpretation at all. I am certainly not going to dismiss the right, or even to say that the left is worse. There are problems on both sides. That is beyond dispute. And taking that into account, it's difficult to know where to begin with his interpretation. After all, in this very video, Owen Jones himself has normalised the habit of tarring all his political opponents as fascists. And we know where that leads, don't we? But I guess we could begin by doing a direct comparison with similar activism from the left. And you can make up your own mind about which is more unpleasant.
About the killing of black individuals in America. Put your hands on me again, I'll fuck you up. Put your hands on me again and I'll fuck you up. Hands on me again and I'll fuck you up. Bitch, what? Hands on me again and I'll fuck you up. What?
Not a great start. But I'm now going to show you two more clips. The first one is of a little old lady who marched with Martin Luther King. So she's a liberal through and through. But she gets pretty unpleasant abuse after the radicals have poured paint all over her. And the second clip is of the Portland mayor, Ted Wheeler. And Wheeler is an entirely left-wing politician who has declared unequivocal support for Antifa. So let's see how these people react with those who are on their side.
That's just a taste of what PPD's done to us. Kick your nuts. All right. 59 seem to do that to your people, Ted. Take a deep breath, Ted. Now you know what it feels. Steady right there. Feels good, right? Doing this to your people, man. Breathe it in. You gotta fucking stop doing it. Breathe it in. Yeah, man, you fucking enjoy it. Fucking coward. Yeah, man, what do you think people feel, man? What is happening to your fucking people? Go fucking push me. Yeah, I know. How's it feeling you, man? Yeah, it does. Breathe deep. Let the feds come here. Yeah, dude, you're fucking great. Police fucking touch the people. How's it feel? It hurts all. Let it go anywhere. How's it feel? You can't run your city. How's it feel? Stop pushing it. I'm not pushing you. I'm not pushing you. How's it feel? How does it feel? Don't fucking touch me! Fuck you, Ted Wheeler! Fuck you! Resign!
Remember, Ted Wheeler, the Portland mayor, is an ally of these people. What do you suppose would happen if someone they regarded as an enemy was there? Imagine if Tucker Carlson had tried to walk through that mob the way Jones had walked through those Brexit supporters. Would he be grinning and joking the way that Owen was? I somehow doubt it. I'd like now to return to Owen's points about right-wing terrorism. Let's remind ourselves what he thinks.
Well, firstly, if we look at the far right in this country, as I said, Joe Cox was murdered by the far right. Another Labour...
Well, one individual of the far right.
Well, yes, a member of the far right murdered
Right.
her. Another former member of the leader of BNP tried to kill another Labour MP. Darren Osborne, a far right terrorist, came to London, rammed his van into a mosque and said he was there to try and kill Jeremy Corbyn and Sadiq Khan as terrorist supporters. There were 4 or 5 failed far right terror plots last year, which thankfully did not succeed. A 36% increase in far right referrals.
It's rather peculiar that Jones is so damning about far-right terrorism, for which he cites a body count of 1. But he spent years refusing to properly condemn Islamic terrorism. He's expressed some sympathy for the victims of that scourge, but he never vocalises condemnation for the perpetrators. Now this seems rather inconsistent. He's also brushed off Labour's record of defending the IRA. And he made clear that the far right is a real and present murderous threat. The left is not. Now let's put this claim to the test. I'm not going to brush off right-wing terror the way Jones does with the left. I fully accept it's a serious issue, and that the ideology has produced some despicable individuals. They deserve outright condemnation. Jones mentioned the terrible case of Joe Cox, who was murdered by Thomas Mayer, a far-right fanatic. And I'd add to that list Anders Breivik and Brenton Tarrant, 2 of the most despicable killers of recent years. No one would deny how much of a threat the far-right can be. But what about Jones's assertion that the far left is not? Well, in August 2020, Michael Reynolds, a far-left Antifa activist, shot Aaron J. Danielson dead in cold blood in a Portland street. Reynolds was later killed in a shootout with the police. In March 2017, Eric Clanton approached Sean Stiles as the latter was chatting amiably to some radical women. Clanton, another member of Antifa, clubbed Stiles in the head with a large metal bike lock. Eric Ray and Andy No were also left with severe brain injuries after being attacked by Antifa. In July 2019, Willem Van Spronsen set out for the Immigration and Customs Facility in Tacoma, Washington. He was armed to the teeth with guns and bombs, bent on causing carnage. But he was shot by police before he managed to kill anyone. In the summer of 2017, James T. Hodgkinson, a radical leftist and Bernie Sanders fan, opened fire on a Republican baseball match. He shot 5 people. The year before that, Mika Xavier Johnson, a supporter of numerous black radical groups, opened fire during a Black Lives Matter rally in Dallas. He killed 5 policemen and wounded 9 more, along with 2 civilians. In December 2017, Rodrigo Lanza, a far-left activist, and 3 of his associates beat the 55-year-old Victor Lainez to death in Spain, simply for wearing braces in the colours of the Spanish flag. For this high crime, they screamed he was a fascist and murdered him. That, if you might remember, is the phrase that Owen Jones likes to throw about. In August 2019, Connor Betts, a radical leftist and admirer of Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders and Antifa, opened fire in Dayton, Ohio. He killed 9 people and injured 27 more in just 30 seconds of mayhem. Betts had also bragged of his desire to kill fascists. So he was motivated by the language of hate normalised by Owen Jones. The day before the Betts massacre, Patrick Crusius had killed 22 people and injured another 24 in El Paso. Attempts were made to blame that spree on the right. But Crusius was a radical environmentalist concerned by population growth. He wrote a manifesto where he claimed that he was repelled by elites, the power of corporations, and what he called the dreadful waste of consumer culture. He also made clear he had no time at all for Donald Trump. So I'm not sure he sounds terribly right-wing. In October 2020, in Denver, Colorado, Matthew Doloff, a Trump-hating far-left activist, shot a Patriot Prayer member in the head and killed him. While in March 2021, Ahmad al-Alawi Alissa killed 10 people in a grocery store in Boulder, Colorado. Ahmed was a rabid anti-Trumper. Owen Jones' assertion looks rather shaky then. And if we widen our historical net, we can find quite a bit more evidence. In the 60s and 70s, the likes of the Weather Underground, the Symbionese Liberation Army, and the Black Panthers were responsible for dozens of shootings, bombings, and murders across America, while the far-left Angry Brigade in the UK planted scores of bombs too. In the 1970s and 80s, the Italian Red Brigades carried out a string of shootings and kidnappings. They murdered at least 50 people. From 1970, the Red Army faction of the Baader-Meinhof group were active for over 30 years. They planted 296 bombs or arson attacks and killed at least 34 people. The IRA were another socialist group, active across the same period. Their members devoured the writing of Che Guevara, Mao, Stalin and Ho Chi Minh. And at least 3,000 died in the troubles that they inspired. In Peru, the Shining Path, the far-left terror organisation led by Abimael Guzman, killed around 70,000 people in the 1980s, while the decades-long campaign of the Marxist-Leninist Tamil Tigers in Sri Lanka led to the deaths of 80,000. And that's not even considering these guys. Adolf Hitler is widely dismissed as belonging to the far right. But if you'll watch some other films I've made of him, you'll realise that's far from the case. The idea that the left is not a murderous threat is palpable nonsense. As for Jones, to outright condemn one side while dismissing the far worse violence of the other is an unforgivable distortion, especially as far-left violence is spiking again. And for Jones to condemn those who normalise this behaviour, when he himself normalises the demonisation of his political opponents as fascists, is the most crass and brazen hypocrisy imaginable. In the BLM riots that have ripped through America in the last year, the death rate has risen by an average of 7,000 on any year in the last 25 years in America. And that violence shows no indication of calming down. The fact is that while the far right has a string of lone nutters to its name, on the far left, the radicals have always gathered in groups. They do this because they have no shame about their violence, which is why Jones simply pretends that it doesn't happen, or just outright lies about it. But this mob mentality, this refusal to accept that their activism is a problem, only makes them even more dangerous. One thing's certain. We've not heard the last of left-wing violence and murder. And while conservatives outright condemn the violence of the far right, the likes of Owen Jones will never do the same for the far left. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. And if you're interested in these topics, I've written 2 books which go into them in a great deal of detail. They're called The Tyranny of the Left, and they're available on the links below. Please feel free to pick them up and let me know what you think. Thank you.